Welcome to our webinar with our esteemed presenters on the art of building front-end applications in capital markets. My name is Tim Baker and I lead the financial services practice here at Expero. For those of you that are new to Expero, we build high-end software for expert users across many industries, from oil and gas, smart grids, healthcare, and of course financial services, which is about 50% or so of the work that we do. We will take on small and large projects, sometimes just UX and design work, but very often building whole products for customers. These can be new systems. Very often in financial services, we will help customers stabilize and then migrate off of legacy systems onto replacement systems, which we also build, and hopefully we upgrade those systems in the process. We do a lot of work in the network analytics space with a number of solutions in the financial crime and anti-money laundering, as well as the flip side of that. Instead of finding the bad guys, we find the good guys, in other words, Customer 360. And you can see some of the logos of the folks that we work with at the bottom there. Given the over 20 years of consulting in these areas, and based on repeated patterns and use cases, we've also developed a framework we call Connected that is both an accelerator for our consulting business, but also creates licensable software that we deploy out to customers. So today we have two experts. Dare I say we have two veterans in the field of product management and design. I've worked with both of them over the years, more recently with Sarah, having joined Expero, but I've known Richard for at least 10 years. We worked together at Thomson Reuters and then Refinitiv. So let's start with the intros. Over to you, Richard and Sarah.
All right. So I'm Sarah Slate. I'm the Director of User Experience at Expero. I've been working as a UX designer in some capacity for, over 15 years now, I think. But I've been involved in many projects rooted in finance here at Expero, from primary issuance to multi-asset portfolio management to risk analysis, to name a few.
Great. So my name is Richard Barnett. I'm a 20-year veteran of digital product management, leadership and design. I started my career at Bloomberg. I spent 13 years there. I worked on a lot of Bloomberg's most widely used applications, including Launchpad, their instant messaging application, their news platforms, and quite a number of other things. Worked with Tim at Thomson Reuters, and latterly I worked at JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. I wanted to get more close to the clients, and that was a really good experience there. Most of my career was in New York, but about 4 years ago I moved back to London. I've set up my own digital consulting, product strategy, design and product management agency, where ostensibly I work with companies as a head of product to help them get to the right place when they're undergoing digital transformation initiatives. And on that note, I'll hand it back to Tim.
So let's start at a high level of 20,000 feet. What are some of the high level goals of the institutions, the financial institutions, when it comes to product and UX design? Why don't we start with you, Richard?
Sure. Well, look, there's obviously a broad range of different things that people are looking to do. I can talk to maybe some of my experience that I just referred to. So it can be everything from growing a business, filling a gap. There may be a business where a financial institution may not be as strong as they want to be. And so providing things in a digital fashion and building something modern and usable is a way of closing that gap. So you're really extending the value in that way. And these days, there's obviously a lot of demand for operational efficiencies and cost savings. And so digital is obviously a route for that. So, and it's really interesting, actually, to hit this one recently, a lot of manual work that happens within an organization when the money's flowing. It doesn't get a lot of attention, even though everyone knows it's not as efficient as it should be. But when the money stops flowing and these things come under the microscope. And so there's a focus on how can we streamline those workflows and reduce errors? How can we do things to make sure that we're going to pass the regulators' expectations of us? And by the way, wouldn't it be great to save some money? So that's also a big driver.
Yeah, I guess in the 90s and 2000s, it was just like throw people at the problem, keep the lights on, keep moving.
Yeah.
And I think there was a period where there wasn't a lot of investment in systems and workflow. I think there was a lot of offshoring was a big trend as well.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And one other thing I'll just throw in there, actually, to your point, Tim, about efficiencies is data, right? So there's been a huge focus on data for, I mean, you're the expert on this, but I'd say 10 years, right? The cloud and data, and this acknowledgement that there's so many different data sources, different databases. And so there's an effort to kind of combine them and provide APIs. And when you're, if you've got all the data, at some point, there's very often a human being sitting in front of it. Not always, it could be going into a computer, but in many instances, there's a human that needs to consume it. And that's where the user experience really kicks in. And so that's another driver within financial institutions as part of their making their data more efficient and delightful, is how we're going to use it and how can we render that in front of the people that can benefit from it.
You touched on a lot of common themes that I'm seeing too. A lot of the modernization work that I've been involved with has been focused on streamlining and automating workflows, enabling interop and collaboration across products and systems, digitizing analog workflows, and just overall making it easier to work with and analyze data. I mean, that's like the high level. And with that, just trying to, reduce information overload, handle context switching more elegantly and without error. And, just trying to tighten up consistent interaction models, establishing a single look and feel. I think a lot of that goes back to like reduced training costs and efficiencies, but also seeing a lot of similar experience goals from the projects I've been involved in.
Yeah, I think it's becoming more, it's become more part of the fabric of these companies to sort of strive to think in a digital way. Whether they achieve it or not is sort of how we make a living, right? Is to help them do that. But it's becoming more of an base level expectation, table stakes kind of expectation. That digital is a route to afford those efficiencies and to extend the business value that they provide to their clients. Should we move to the next question, because
I think we might know what it is ahead of time. So that's fine with me. I know Tim wanted to talk about what typical engagement models look like when dealing with some of these large institutions. And so I was going to talk a little bit about how we engage with clients at Expero. And we'll see if we break the webinar again, because I am now going to try to share a slide to have a visual aid. Hopefully you are seeing the slide. Okay, perfect. Nice. So, at Expero, before we even start pushing pixels, we go through a discovery process with stakeholders and SMEs to really identify the audience, the key personas and use cases, evaluate, if there is an existing backlog or ideas. Mapping out existing user journeys is my favorite discovery activity. This helps us identify user pain points, those areas of friction, potential opportunities for optimization, interop, automation. Going through this exercise with users also helps validate the business value and validate that we're even solving the right problems for users, so that we don't end up building what we like to call the big, beautiful, wrong thing. So once we move into the rapid design and prototyping phase, we're able to validate again with users, stakeholders, usually engineering this time, using high fidelity design prototypes like a Figma prototype or similar. And this helps us further ensure that we're building the right thing and that it is also technically feasible. Then we can move into development with validated outcomes, scope requirements, and along with a pretty buttoned up design spec.
And Sarah, so do you sometimes find with the pain points, I mean, what approaches do you take to kind of extract them out? Because people don't always know the pain points. Like if you're dealing particularly with something that's quite operational, someone could have been doing that job for years and they're doing things in a very less than efficient and potentially error prone way, but because they've been used to it for that long, that's what they do, and they wouldn't necessarily identify it as a pain point. So how do you go about identifying those pain points even when the end user doesn't explicitly articulate them?
Direct user observation, demoing their current tools is the best way to go about it. Because, you know, like you said, what they tell you and what they think they feel may not be what's actually happening. You know, so being able to observe the actual users in their existing environment is really key. You know, there are hurdles involved with that and getting, you know, connected with them and having everyone on board. There's often a bit of like, you know, UX education and evangelizing on UX methodologies to get, you know, our stakeholders and SMEs on board. But usually the results are, you know, pretty speak to themselves when, you know, doing direct observations. Often when I ask someone on the product side what their pain points are, and then ask the users, you're typically not always going to get the same answer. So it's definitely good to go to the source. But it's interesting, like just observing how they're working and like how many times they get distracted from tasks. Some analysis done from observing a user trying to onboard new data into their system, basically. So I was just like, sit with me over Zoom, show me how you do everything, and recorded the session so that I could go back and actually like check the timestamps. How long did it take to do this task? How many different times did they have to hop out and get into another tool or reference a user manual? So I was able to come back, you know, to the product teams with like, this is a problem and here's, you know, some data and analysis on it. But, you know, seeing like that first task of just trying to add a graph to a dashboard took 24 minutes and they had to hop out of that tool 11 times to accomplish the task. So just, you know, that direct observation so that you have the data to kind of, you know, help arm you.
Yeah.
Be persuasive is super helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I would concur with that because one of the things when you're involved in product development, product management and design is a plethora of opinions. It's not always possible, but whenever you can show the data, that really helps because the data is irrefutable. I mean, you can argue against it, but if it's straightforward, we observed this, we timed this, these are the tasks, this is how long it took, and it's presented that way versus what you'd like it to be. And the other thing is, someone actually mentioned it to me the other day, if you can not just show the data, but also tie it back to a value, right? When you're dealing with financial institutions, they think in dollar terms, they think in pound terms, they think in money terms, right? So then if you can tie back those observations to what it's costing and then have a target state of where you want to be and how that will reduce costs, that will help to, you know, convince people of the validity of your observations and your and maybe your proposals.
So I think we probably started to touch on this, but you know, what are some of the challenges you've had dealing with large organizations and the way that you engage with them? Richard, you've worked at Goldman, at JP Morgan, but you've also worked with me at Refinitiv and TR, with lots of big customers, you know, and obviously doing consulting and advising companies.
Yeah.
Where, you know, what are some of those big kind of engagement challenges, would you say?
Well, I suspect it won't surprise too many people, some of my observations over the years. But look, one of them is multiple stakeholders, right? In large organizations, there's not a clear demarcation between people's responsibilities. Sometimes there is, but there's multiple stakeholders, especially with a major investment in digital. Many people will want to be involved. And so that can be a challenge because you can be receiving inputs from multiple sources who feel they're the only ones that should be listened to. Lack of technical understanding. So that doesn't mean that you need to understand bits and bytes. What I mean by that, I'll give you an example. I was just thinking of it earlier. In my time, I won't mention where, we did much of what Sarah was just showing. We were doing an upgrade on a trading application, and to be able to elicit the feedback that we wanted from the business owners and some of the people on the ground as well, the salespeople, etc. We did a visualization, so we really articulated the requirements in a visual way to elicit feedback and to, you know, make sure everyone was aligned on it, which they were, by the way. But I remember showing it, and one of the salespeople said, you know, can't you do this in? And this was all on a PowerPoint. There was nothing real about it at all. And I had managed the expectations by saying, there's nothing real about this. This is just showing you imagery. We still have to build it. And still someone said, you know, can't you do that in 3 weeks? And why not? I'm looking at it right now. So, you know, sometimes when you're using that visual approach, you have to go the extra mile to manage people's expectations. And then the other thing that's a challenge that I found throughout my career is people speak in subject matter expert SME language, right?
Yeah.
So to them, you know, derivatives trading is like speaking English the way we are now. But to me, without a background in derivatives trading, it's a foreign language. And I think,
And these are not patient people either. These are people that expect you to understand what they're saying, and they also want something delivered in 3 weeks as well, because they live in a much smaller time horizon.
Look, they're time starved, right? So you have to be sensitive to that, right? But I think if you approach it with humility and curiosity, and by humility, that doesn't mean being a mouse in the corner. It means, you know, I'm a digital expert, you're an expert on structured products. I want to understand your workflows more. I want to understand it. I'm going to ask you some questions. They might seem a bit daft to you, but it really helps me. I think if you kind of take that approach, people are usually quite helpful. I mean, everyone's different. Everyone has a different personality, but that's always worked for me. And I've worked on so many different products in so many different areas. And when I've gone in, for the most part, I haven't known anything about it, but it's my job to learn about it as much as I need to in order to kind of, you know, devise that product strategy. So I think one of the things I would say about mitigating some of those challenges is to not be afraid. One of the mistakes that I've seen is that someone might be frozen by this whether they're senior or they're just a subject matter expert who's speaking quant language. They sort of like, God, I don't want to ask another question because I'll look like an idiot. And it's like you have to get rid of that. You have to just say, look, I'm here to understand, because unless I do, I'm going to prescribe something that's wrong, and then it will invoke anger on the other side. So yeah, that would be some of my observations.
I think that first one, the stakeholder point, is one I've come across as well, which is where you've got management who want to implement something, and the traders or whoever just resist, because it, you know, more often than not, it's another step in a process that they don't want to do, that they don't think helps them make money.
What you mean the actual proposal from, let's say, a senior person?
Yes.
I mean, a good example of that I've seen is in the sort of wealth management space. Not in this decade, admittedly. So I think I can say it quite freely. But previously, the desire to digitize wealth management capabilities, and the way that it worked at that time was you had human beings dealing with their clients. So even if that client wanted to place a stock trade, and this is in my time in the States, so E-Trade and Scottrade and everyone else that in Robinhood that's all out there, but at that time, if you were a high net worth individual client and you wanted to place a trade, you had to call up a human being, and there was a lot of resistance to that. So that's something that, as a product or designer, it's difficult for you to get over that on your own. You have to do that in collaboration with senior management. But we got there in the end.
Yeah. So we've worked with some big institutions. What are some of the challenges you've come across? Any of those resonate from Richard? Any others?
Yeah, the too many cooks in the kitchen problem, having a lot of stakeholders involved that may have competing goals or agendas, and sometimes without like someone established as the tiebreaker or ultimate decision maker, can make things hairy. And then with the, breaking out in little groups like that, then it's easy to like lose track of decisions that have been made in silos. And so, needing to like document decisions and things that are transparent to everyone. And then, just in cases where we haven't had a direct line to the end users and not being able to validate or interview them directly and get it, straight from their point of view. It obviously causes problems.
Well, I think sometimes, if you're working with what I've seen is if you're working with the technology team, they're very protective of their end users. Because they're in the business, they're making the money for the firm. So sometimes you can't get that access. So you're hearing things kind of secondhand. I've seen that a couple of times. Yeah,
and that game of telephone, it's helpful to get any information. But yeah, you have to be a little wary of that game of telephone, because things get interpreted differently from person to person.
Do you come across kind of strong personalities as well? So you get someone who's always very vocal, like, I'd like it like this, and this is the way.
Yes, and that was one of the points, like when you're, meeting with, end users or SMEs or, advisors, talking about them like one-on-one groups or very small, because if you try to do it like a, group interview or whatever, like that loudest person is going to end up dominating the entire conversation, and all of your feedback is going to come from that one person. Right. So like small groups, one-on-one interviews if possible. Maybe you have a note taker, things like that on your own side, but trying not to do a big panel discussion where 80% of the people in the room don't end up saying anything. So let's kind of dig a little bit deeper now and talk about some of those key considerations and design aspects when you're picking apart a workflow or an application, or you're designing a new application for capital markets. What are some of the general things that you find yourself building around? What concepts and what tools do you use to do that? Yeah, I have got some slides to share. Let me see if I can do this again. So one of the big things that we try to employ is just considering patterns that will help reduce the cognitive load for users. Financial services apps tend to have a high volume of data for users to wrangle with, so just trying to simplify that. Some patterns that you frequently use are anything that can help you simplify and prioritize that complex data into action. That can be with prioritized task lists and alerts. It's really helpful when they feature recommended next best actions. So like you're not staring at a dashboard trying to figure out, what do I need to do next? What is priority? I know this thing is a problem, it's red and blinking at me, but like, what's the action that I should take? I'm trying to, help reduce those decision points, and just, provide some prioritization for users. using data visualizations to your advantage to pull out insights and summarize key information to make it more digestible, are all things that help kind of break things up for the user and reduce that cognitive load. If you're incorporating like real-time data visualization and analysis and alerting into your front end, you know, it's really good to consider the use of motion and animation to convey that this is in fact real time. Unlike my very static example here that's not doing anything, but like, you know, if it looks static, users will interpret it as that. And then inline, like contextual alerts and notifications can help like draw your attention to say a line item on a grid or a table that needs inspected, an anomaly that was detected in a time series chart. Anything to help like give users cues of where they need to look and focus their energy and attention. And while we know like most users we talk to are like, oh, I want to see everything, like give me all the data, I want to see everything, like it's not easy to sift through or just digest. So giving the users some, you know, options to discover more and launch into workflows before putting the whole kitchen sink into your dashboard. There are a number of patterns that are helpful for this, contextual menus, tooltips and popovers, things like drill downs and inspection panels, and then, you know, being able to launch into more like focused workflows with using, you know, progressive disclosure patterns and dynamic forms are all helpful. And then, you know, touching back on the looking for opportunities to streamline workflows for users and that journey mapping exercise I mentioned earlier, like it's so helpful to document that, like what their current existing experience is, not the ideal one yet. You know, finding out where can you reduce friction or hurdles, like having to collect data from multiple places in order to perform an analysis and make a decision. Thinking about what tasks can be automated, where can repetition be eliminated? You know, is there opportunity for interop and integrations? Like these are all, you know, part of that exercise and discovery of just, you know, highlighting where those opportunities are, what's going to bring value. And then I think my last one to touch on, for those experiences that are highly like customizable or personalized, a lot of times like in tools where you have a composable UI and users can kind of create their own views, you know, we can't always control everything in those experiences environments, but making sure that you provide a consistent structural framework and interaction model that, you know, works across the board and the IA makes sense. Even if the like content is changing or dynamic, at least the general interaction model can stay, you know, remains consistent, and users are figuring out those repeatable patterns and interactions to use.
That last picture you showed there reminded me a lot of OpenFin. We work with OpenFin, we're a design partner and a system integration partner. And I think this notion of interoperability between apps, I think, is a big challenge for large financial institutions. And Richard, you've designed systems for traders where I think the solution used to be, you know, add another screen. And of course, you know, there's only, I think maybe 8 screens is the most that I've ever seen. And a lot of flashy, blinky, you know, grids and stuff going on. But I think now the front end technology is getting so much better, you don't have to add another screen. You can use, you know, more intelligence to kind of serve up the right answer. What's your you know, more recent experience around this area?
Yeah. So just if we think of it, one of those key considerations, it's I'll take a step back, that the user doesn't always know what they need, right? So asking those questions, looking at the screens with them, and really trying to understand what's important. I remember once working on an analytical, it was a kind of TCA related capability. And the way that it used to work is the salesperson would go out to their client with, you know, a table full of data and then would talk to it. So in thinking about a better product, because we wanted to give the clients the ability to see that dynamically, you know, one of the things I sat with the salesperson and sort of had to ask many times, when you go out, what are you showing? And they said that, well, that and that and that, but why? And what's your story behind it? And to try to construct out exactly what, you know, where that value was, because that then informed what should be in that analytic. And then of course, then the challenge is, if you've got that data and you can show that data, let's make sure that you do it in a very intuitive way. And that's when the design really kicks in to make sure it's as clear and discoverable as possible. So that's kind of that's more of an approach, a general approach. The other thing that I think you've got to bear in mind is the industry can be quirky. So you can have design people that you work with or that work in your company who come from, obviously Sarah's very experienced and you with financial services, but if people come in from the outside, they won't understand some of the unique facets of finance. Now, what I mean by that, and the way that people interact with it, right? People are data gorged, time starved, need to, and as Sarah said, need to see that information quickly and need to access that information quickly. And so I think one of the experience I've had with some UX people who haven't come from a financial services background is the fonts are quite small and there's a huge amount of spacing, and it's fine because the traders can just scroll through it. And it's like, that's not the way it works. They need to be able to get to it quickly. And so something like a Bloomberg command line, which looks so 1980s DOS to I know they've upgraded it in the last few years, but looks so 1980s DOS to someone coming out of college, you know, having studied, you know, human interactive design principles. But to a trader and actually anyone in finance, the ability to go to that command line, type something quickly and access it immediately. They could be on a phone with a client, there could be a trade pending, anything of any importance, and finance moves fast to whoever you are. That ability to access things very quickly means that the fact that objectively that might look a little old, it's an incredibly efficient way of accessing information. And so, you know, I think we were talking the other day, a younger me once when I was working at Bloomberg, I was always looking to modernize and update things. And I remember the command line was a target for me. And I went around and talked to people and actually found out it was incredibly useful, incredibly functional, and was something that did not need replacing. And any product that wants to appeal to the same audiences that we've discussed need to think about the need for speed.
You know, I think about all the trends we're seeing at the moment in machine learning and AI and all of that. You know, you can imagine a world where actually the computer's anticipating, you know, what you're going to type in next, or you can basically ask it to do something and it will pull together that mosaic of data. Yeah,
I mean that I remember at Thomson Reuters, one of the things that I implemented there was a sidebar that went next to a monitor. Now any trader will want to see everything.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that there's not an opportunity to give them a sort of a digest of insight, because they'll move away from their desk for one reason or another, come back and they want to immediately see what's going on. And yes, they can look through 1,000 securities, but if there was something that said, these are the things that are moving the most. And that's very simple. That's definitely sort of, you know, the last decade kind of approach. And that's when I was at TR. So it's appropriate. As you say, with AI and greater insights, you know, it doesn't have to be the same sort of widget showing the same information every time. It can vary it based on what's going on. And now with the power of AI, you can vary that information so broadly that it will be a lot more of use to anyone who's watching what's going on in the markets or looking for trading opportunities.
Well, I think you said it earlier, you know, finance is partly about storytelling, and storytelling to me is pulling a narrative together which is really gathering. You know, I remember, you know, when I was an analyst, if one of my stocks moved a lot, you know, my customers would come to me and say, you know, why is such and such a stock down %? And I would be struggling to figure out what just happened. Now, of course, you know, that can be automated, that creation of narrative, at least piecing together the data as an event unfurls. You know, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, just as on the wealth side, you know, when a client account changes, maybe there's a big inflow or outflow of money, then that should spur a call from the financial advisor to say, hey, I see, you know, you've just had a big deposit, you know, can I help you invest it? And so I think the user experience is going to start to be really dramatically affected by the data, the underlying data, and changes to the data, and recognizing, you know, patterns. And we do quite a bit of that in the risk side, where we proactively look for, you know, patterns of bad actors, for example. It still feels like it's the early days. And there's more upside.
I totally agree. As I say, I think there's a lot of huge data sets that still people are trawling through, when it should be easier. It should be served up. This notion, I mean, the word dashboard gets bandied around all over the place, but the idea of having a dashboard that gives you actionable insights, versus, you know, we've done such a great job of collecting the data that we're now going to throw it up on a page, but not in a great logic, and not in a way that's consumable, particularly actionable. And that's why the importance of understanding the end user's workflows.
And there's this assumption that if you just make it flash red and green, that will make it easier to see patterns, as if we can do that. But anyway, so I want to very quickly move on to two more topics, and then if we've got any questions, we'll throw it open. You know, I think, and we've touched on some of these things, but, you know, as far as kind of blockers and challenges, things that really trip us up at the end of the day, we've done a beautiful design. You know, we've done our focus groups. We've got, you know, the product where we think it, and, you know, where we think it needs to be. What kind of, in your experience, is kind of, you know, what are still some of the niggling technical factors, maybe outside of your control? And that's really for either of you to have a go at that.
I mean, so I've been doing some more UX workshops lately, with some customers and partners, and kind of having them demo some stuff that's in development, and, you know, just take me through the workflows. Let me have a peek at those, and I'm seeing there's just a lot of work involved to get like legacy systems and backends to a point of being consumable by a sexy new front end. And sometimes they're, you know, they look great, but they're not as performant. And I think that's, you know, touching back on the like console or terminal that is typically faster, because I've had this happen on projects for years, where it's like you design a you know, nice new front end and hook everything up, and then the feedback you get is that, well, it's still faster in this, you know, basically like DOS tool that I'm using or whatever. Like it just, like there's still like seeing some issues of newer tools being able to really bite off those big chunks of data and process them and have it be performant. Another thing I've seen that's kind of caught my eye lately, that I still like, I'm like, I know this needs a solution. I'm not exactly sure what it is yet. But, you know, a lot of these like rising popularity and these like containerized experience to really enable interop across apps and stitch workflows together with a promise of a seamless experience. And then I see someone demo the actual workflow to me in real life, and there's a lot of friction with like frequent authentication, especially in banking. And I know there's a good reason it exists, but like log into this window and then the next window and then you 2FA, and just, it's a lot of interruption. And to me, it you know, granted, it's all wrangled up in one window, but it's still a lot of disruption and friction and time that it takes. Often if they're trying to, change context, maybe they have, another client calling while they're looking at one client, and they need to, spin up information on the person that's calling, and handling that context switching in an elegant way where you don't lose your context when that call ends, and you don't make mistakes of entering the wrong information across customer accounts. So those are some areas where I'm like, I think, I'm now thinking about what technical solutions might be out there to really deliver on the user experience, of making it truly seamless and frictionless.
There was one that stood out to me recently, which was we were showing some design work, and it was in the wealth space, and everyone seemed to really like the direction of travel. But then someone said, "Can we just fix the data?" One of the issues was the data in two of these systems just never agreed. So you can build this beautiful workflow, but if the underlying data isn't fixed as well, it kind of undermines the project. And I suspect that's a common pattern.
It is. I actually, if you want to indulge me, have gathered a few. These are some quotes from actual users that I've gathered over the years, of talking about their biggest pain points, what takes them the longest, what's their biggest time suck. It's always the data. Modeling it, getting it right, getting it structured correctly. But it comes up time and time again across projects, across institutions, and different slices of the finance world, is just the time users are having to spend trying to get the data right and being able to work with it.
Yeah. The data. Yeah. And Richard, you reflected on that right at the beginning. Any other kind of gotchas or blockers that you come across? You've done all this work and then there's some big thing in the way stopping it being successful?
Getting the sign off, from what I said at the beginning, multiple people, if they disagree, sometimes you can end up being piggy in the middle. And which way do you go? If you do it that way, someone's unhappy. If you do it that way, someone's unhappy. So that's just keeping it real in financial services. That can happen, especially in larger organizations. You mentioned about the data. The other thing is InfoSec, information security, right? So you can dream up anything and visualize it in Figma, but the reality is that even if they've got the data, you might not be able to get it for whatever reason. But that's a common area that needs to be acknowledged and appreciated whenever you approach an initiative. And of course, if you can't get the data, you can't get the product. You can't get the product, then this conversation about UX is academic, right? So
So that's almost having two visionary, future state.
Some of it's not even that visionary. Sometimes it's not even that visionary. Sometimes it's data that you think, or even it's the whole initiative. It's like, this is a really great idea. Everyone buys into it. It would be great. All the businesses, UX people, everyone's aligned on that. And then when it goes to the InfoSec guys, it's like, oh no, but it can't sit there. That has to be over here. And then that's something that, I mean, it's surmountable, but it's definitely something that can challenge you.
So in the last couple of minutes, let's kind of look to the future. What excites you? Where do you think where do you think products and capital markets are going to go? Will we end up with, everything being interoperable, all talking the same language, and life will suddenly get easier? Will it be, will we all be using robo advisors and robo traders, and or is that a long way off? What new stuff are you kind of thinking about?
Right. Well, I guess what I've been thinking about lately is like, when can my system become situationally aware and respond to changing contexts of like what I might be doing at my desk or where I'm at? will we be able to support seamless workflows across like devices and form factors? I know there's still a lot of like being tied to a desktop that's secure on-prem, maybe at your office, and like, kind of really freeing people for more mobility along their work. I would love to, be able to just have like a natural query language function that can draw me entire dashboards or whole reports. Can it learn and iterate and help me optimize, further those workflows? That's what I'd like to see.
So look, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, right? I still think there is a lot of opportunities at the ground level for digitization. And with any of these things, there's a huge importance for the user experience and a place for design. And it's, as we've talked about, it's amazing how many PDFs are still sent out and how much people rely on it and copy and paste.
Forget the AI. It's actually basic good practice, well-designed products, right?
Yeah. So I think some of the things that I've seen over the last few years, I did some work in commercial real estate, which is still an investment class in the financial markets, and it's really amazing the opportunities there for digitization and digital transformation. And as I say, that's at the ground floor. So what excites me about Chat GPT is because at first people would say, oh, it's revolutionizing everything, and I'm like, how does that change fintech? And to give a simple example, over the last couple of years I did some work on a tool that allowed you to construct an investment and backtest it. And one of the biggest challenges, apart from the data element of it, was the interface. There was so much complexity. The value was in the complexity, but then you had to kind of present it. How do you simplify something that's complicated? What do you show? What do you not show? What do you show as a, basic level versus advanced level? And we were thinking of all these ideas. And when I think about that power that the Chat GPT has, which is I can go to it and in natural language, type in what I'm looking for. I want a investment that does this and has these characteristics, but not that, and exclude this. And for this particular parameter, I want it at 1.94. And to just be able to type that in and have the results come back to you, it's something, I don't know if you remember, Tim, we tried it with Icon, and I think Bloomberg at one point tried it, and I'm going back to the early 10s, and it never quite worked. But I think what's been proved out with this technology is that it can happen if the data is structured correctly.
Well, and I think in the past we were probably trying to do it much more on a rules basis. So we were still having to write that code and anticipate what people wanted to do with all the variables. Whereas certainly in this new kind of space, the large language model space, as they call it, it's really relatively unconstrained. I think the question is, now I've seen ChatGPT write quite good code. And, at the end of the day, when you're building a backtester, you're using a tool, could be in Python, but I could imagine someone doing a really nice connector that does allow you to say, using these three sources and this strategy, please backtest, and I'd like to measure performance against this and calculate the Sharpe ratio. I can imagine that, because it would generate the right code snippets and run that, and then present the answer, right?
And that's a very analyst sort of centric view, which isn't surprising from you. I mean, when I think about producing products for the masses as well, right? I just think about these constructs and how much calculators are set out and which parameters go in which place. And now you think that you can just type it in with the parameters. Now, one challenge with that, and I think this is an opportunity for the future of product design, is that having this input field assumes that you know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And yet the capabilities of these service providers are so numerous that you may not know it. And if you don't know it, you're not going to ask for it and you're not going to benefit from it. So there's an interesting UX challenge where you can give that input field where you can type what you're looking for, but also you've got to think about how you combine that with creating awareness and heroing new features, new capabilities, so that people can incorporate that into things that they ask for. So I think that kind of, is an interesting new challenge in there that we're going to have in the years to come.
Yeah,
It's a good one though.
I think the other one that excites me, I'd say excites me, but that I've noticed is the quality of the hardware that we use. Go back 10 years, and if we had two screens, they were like this big, and now you can get these beautiful curved screens where you can actually, have high definition. They're used mainly for gaming, but at the end of the day, the gaming industry is ahead of the curve that we're on.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
So I can see, these advanced kind of graphical capabilities being leveraged more and more.
Well, I mean,
explained by the size of the screen, basically.
Well, and then there's the question, and this is probably a bit too far out there at the moment, but it really fascinates me, which is the Oculus Quest, or the Meta Quest as it's called now, and the metaverse, or that virtual reality, augmented reality, and sort of what does that mean for that screens have been getting bigger and bigger, and I think some people actually have sort of these TVs as their monitors now in hedge funds. And you say, well, okay, well, when the glasses do become the size of ours, and you put them on and you can look through different levels of these things, I mean, that takes things into a whole nother direction. But that I suspect that might be a little further off. I think the ChatGPT is definitely sooner.
There was a firm, I think they might have gone public now, but they were dabbling with a virtual Bloomberg type display. And the problem was you had to wear a big heavy headset. I think when the headset better, you can't wear those all day. But it's pretty cool. Look at charts in 3D and things like that.
Yeah. I'm always a bit surprised that people haven't done more with iPads. Like, if I've got my displays in front of me, like the idea of having these buttons on an iPad that you could just, could be programmed for specific purposes. Same way that these custom keyboards used to exist in the 90s with Reuters. But, the iPad, you could put anything on it. You could program it to be whatever you want. Shortcut keys. We've talked about the need for speed in the trading world and in the finance world. It does surprise me that is something that hasn't been developed further. But, it's never too late.
Well, I'm excited about the future, and it's great to have you on the call. Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Sarah. And for those still listening, we'll be sending out a video of this webinar. And as I mentioned, if any of you want to either reach out to Richard directly, where should people find you, Richard?
LinkedIn.
Okay, LinkedIn. And me and Sarah, obviously, through Expero. But thanks again for attending, and I'll speak to you all soon.